This is the Con Canal Bridge, now known as Pegasus Bridge. This was the only crossing point between the sea and Con and the sister bridge just up the road over the River Orne. These were vital arteries for the invasion, with the 6th Airborne landing on the other side of the two waterways. A glider operation was decided to be used to capture the bridges because you could get gliders to a position far quicker than you could get paras after their jumping and assembling. Here we are at the marker stone of Glider 91, flown by Staff Sergeant Jim Warwick. The three gliders to capture Pegasus Bridge came in from the direction of Cabourg, not, as you might have seen in the longest day, from the direction to the right of the canal. They were heading straight for Con, did two right angle turns, and then started to follow the line of the canal. When Warwick's glider approached, he could see the glint of the canal in the moonlight. All of the practice of the previous month of watching the films had all come to fruition. He had a special glass panel cut into the footwell on the right hand side of his hawser, all the three did, to give him this better observation. He knew that it was spot on time, they'd been cast off at the right place, and now it was just his job to do exactly what he had done in training so many times. It touched down, the first one bounced. Jim Warwick let the arrestor parachute go for a couple of seconds, released it. The right hand undercarriage collapsed and the glider came sliding toward us with its right wing touching the ground. John Howard had asked Warwick to put the nose of the glider through a barbed wire fence which went across here, and he had actually managed to do that. Warwick and Ainsworth were thrown through the front of the cockpit, which was all smashed. When Glider 91 came to a halt, there was a slight hiatus. When the men finally sort of recovered from the shock of the landing, they began getting out of the glider. Those at the back got out through a small door on the right-hand side, came around the tail and up the path and stopped just beside where the others who were trying to get out of the glider at the front, where the door had concertinaed in, so they had to smash their way out, met them and then prepared to move forward. Gliders 92 and 93, flown by Staff Sergeants Oliver Boland and Jeff Barkway respectively, were following about a minute behind the Glider 91. The second glider to land, Boland himself had to, although it was going to go into the pond, so he had to wrench the glider around and it broke its back. Barkway's glider hit a ditch and sent Sandy Smith, who was leading that platoon, straight through the cockpit. In Boland's glider, several of the men found themselves thrown out of the glider, either through the door or part of the wreckage. They picked themselves up and followed David Wood towards the bridge. The scout section, of which Wally Parr was a member, Frank Borley, Bill Bailey, their job was to get forward and take the pillbox out. That was to be the first action that was required, because Howard wanted to keep firing to a minimum and also not alert the Germans. So that's exactly what they did. The scout section then headed straight off for the pillbox. John Howard had always planned that the very first action should be the silencing of the pillbox, and that's exactly what happened. Grenades were put into the pillbox. After the grenades went off, Den Brotheridge, leading 25 platoon, started running down the left-hand side of the road. Bill Gray was a bit behind him on the right-hand side of the road, followed by Tom Packwood. As they ran across the bridge, a German fired a flare into the air, and he, another member of the German army, ran off the other end of the bridge. Bill was a Breen gunner, and he ran straight across the bridge and into a station, which is an old railway station that was just over there. And Bill was dying to relieve himself, so he threw a grenade in, then went in, put his Bren against the wall, relieved himself, came out. There was all sorts of explosions and firing going on. He saw a body lying outside the cafe. He realised it was Den Brotheridge. His smock was burning a little bit from phosphorus, but he didn't have time to look at Den. He had to run up the road and take up a pre-down position on the left-hand side of the road on a bank. In 1944 there was actually a petrol pump situated here, and Den Brotheridge was lying just beside this petrol pump. And Bill came out from across the road where there was a station, and this is where he ran up the road after seeing him lying there. Shortly afterwards, Wally Parr and his group came across the bridge, went running up there looking for Brotheridge, and only just a little while later did they notice that he was lying there, and he'd been actually shot straight through the throat. He was still alive, but he couldn't speak. The doctor, John Vaughan, who landed in the third glider, had been slightly concussed when he got out the glider. He then went to the bridge, met John Howard, and Howard told him about the wounding of Brotheridge. He came running across the bridge, eventually found where he was. He was still alive. They got a stretcher and then took him back across the bridge. The men from the second glider had landed and met Major Howard at the end of this bridge. Howard just said number 2 task, and some of Wood's men of the second glider went that way to clear the trenches and also came down this side of the bank to clear this side. They didn't actually get into the trenches for fear of shooting their own men. They had little Bakelite explosive grenades they could throw in and entice the Germans out. They went all the way down this side, and just as they thought they cleared the area, a machine gun opened up from somewhere and hit David Wood in the legs with 3 bullets. He called out for help. The 2 men went and got him and brought him back to this position here, where John Vaughan saw that he was in quite an unstable situation. He then took David Wood and 1 or 2 of the others down the road and formed a regimental aid post in a track just on the right-hand side. Of course, the Germans knew that these were vital arteries. There were positions marked out on the bridge where explosive charges were supposed to be placed in the event of any alert or attempt to try and capture the bridge. The position of the switch to actually blow the bridge was over there in a pillbox. This knowledge about the switch being in the pillbox was gained through the Café Gondry, where the owner's wife, Theresa Gondry, could speak German, and she overheard a conversation in the cafe. The information was passed back to Madame Leah Vion, the local resistance leader who ran the maternity home just further along the canal in the Chateau de Benouville. The actual explosive charges, the Germans had painted certain areas where the charges were to be placed. When the engineers actually got beneath the bridge and on top of it, they realised that the explosives had not been put in place, and they actually found them later in the morning in a small building just across the way there. This was the area of the pillbox, right on the edge of the bridge, and it was here in this position, just outside at that stage, that Corporal Ted Tappenden, Major Howard's radio operator, once he'd heard that the successful capture of the River Orne bridge had happened, began transmitting the code words ham and jam, and he was calling this signal out for quite some time, trying to contact 5th Parachute Brigade. Unfortunately, their radio operator had been killed in the drop. However, he carried on transmitting, saying ham and jam, ham and jam. In the end, he became so frustrated, he was saying ham and jam, and in the end, ham and bloody jam, why don't you answer? Eventually, someone did. Behind me you can see the Chateau de Benouville, which was run by the directress Madame Leah Vion, head of the local resistance. She had actually been a resistant from the moment the Germans arrived, hiding Frenchmen on the run, downed airmen, all kinds of things. She never allowed any Germans in that building. There were several actions on D-Day involving the chateau. There was one incident where Wagger Thornton, the bridge and the area was being sniped and mortared very heavily, and he thought he saw a German movement in one of the windows up there. Fired the gun, it hit the window. Unfortunately, it wasn't actually a German, it was one of the young French resistance people that Madame Vion was hiding. A couple of Germans did get in the building later in the afternoon, an officer and one of his men on the right hand side going up the staircase, and they did actually witness the event of a German gunboat coming down the canal. This was the gun that Wally Parr fired during that day. Apart from the chateau, hitting the chateau once, there was another gunboat later in the afternoon came down from the Con region. Again, he fired 2 shots at it, hit it with a couple of rounds, and it swung round and went back to Con, streaming smoke. Lieutenant Sandy Smith led his platoon from the 3rd glider up to the end of the bridge, met Howard, who just said to him, "Number 3 task." That meant getting across this bridge as fast as he could to reinforce Brotheridge's men who were already setting up here. Smith got to the cafe just here, and just as he got there, a German came out from the other side of the cafe and threw a grenade, which exploded and injured his wrist. Smith shot the German, and just at that time, he looked up at the window, and George Gondry was looking out the window, and just as a reaction, he fired at the window, but fortunately missed, and 2 bullets, one went through the ceiling into the door, and another one ended up in the headboard on the bed. This is the famous Café Gondry, and Madame Gondry was the person who had actually supplied the information. The switch to blow the bridge was in the pillbox on the opposite side. She could speak German, although she didn't let the Germans know this. And the information had been passed on to local resistance via Madame Leah Vion in the maternity home. One of the first commando groups to reach the bridge was 3 Troop of 3 Commando, who were on parabikes. They came roaring across this bridge. One of them, unfortunately, Campbell, was shot in the head and killed. They went straight across and got into the ditches on either side of the bridge and waited for instructions. They then received orders to go up to Amfreville and relieve the 9th Parachute Battalion, which was isolated in the Chateau de Amfreville. Standing outside the Mairie at Benouville, this is on the T-junction of the road that goes down to the canal, and this road here, this road goes down to Con, that road continues on to Weestrom. Well, the Ox and Bucks had set up their defensive perimeter. The 7th Parachute Battalion, which had landed beyond the river and the canal, got here and took up position. A Company went down this road and set up further down the road in amongst the houses. B Company went up that direction and took up position around the church at Le Port. The headquarters of Colonel Pine Coffin was just below the church over there. Before the 7th Parachute Battalion arrived, the Ox and Bucks had captured the bridge and set up their little defensive bridgehead. Shortly after, they heard the sound of armour coming from that direction. Unfortunately, it went across up there. In the meantime, Major Howard brought across Dennis Fox's platoon from the river bridge to the canal bridge. One of them, Wagger Thornton, brought a Piat with him. He was then instructed to get up the left-hand side of the road. A little bit later, the armour came back down this road, stopped here. There was a bit of a conference, and then they turned, started to begin going down the lane towards the bridge. And Wagger, knowing that a Piat was very unreliable, allowed the vehicle to get within 20 yards before opening fire. He hit the vehicle, and it then began to explode with the ammunition cooking off all over the place. This, with the 7th Battalion being dropped all over the place, some of them had gathered together. When they heard these explosions, they thought that the Ox and Bucks were under quite a bit of pressure, so they then hastened to the bridge. They came up this road and took 2 positions really, one towards Weestrom, just there at the church at Le Port, and down into the main part of Benouville. A Company went that way, B Company went that way. This is the corner house on the T-junction at Benouville, and around about dawn, a forward observation team took up residence there and started to look across the fields in that direction, searching for any Germans. Later on in the morning, the attack did indeed come across this road, and some of them Germans actually got this far, and one of them actually knocked on the front door. So you can see just how close the Germans did infiltrate at certain times during the morning. The situation around the bridge, and particularly in this area in Benouville and at Le Port, was extremely fluid, with pockets of Germans engaging pockets of Paras, all in different locations. Major Howard had planned this meticulously. He knew the weight upon his shoulders because it was absolutely vital. This, the very first operation of D-Day, this could set the tone for the day. He knew that in that hour and a half until the 7th Parachute Battalion arrived, they would be on their own, facing possibly all kinds of armour from the 21st Panzer Division. He just didn't know what to expect, but he set a plan. Each man knew exactly what he had to do. Each man in the different gliders could do each other's jobs depending on the order in which they landed. So he had thought the whole matter through meticulously, from the pillbox being the first action to try and keep silence as far as possible. And it worked to a T.